well, from us it was just let's start gathering the data, and I think you're looking at, so it's actually perfect example. We have got Aviva, who has got a bit more buying power than CLT, but you know, it's all about where you are in your journey at the moment, not just sustainability, but in your supply chain management, and then work from there. So identify what needs to improve to actually then start gathering the data, get into that situation and where you are and where you need to be and how you get there. So I think we identified where we are. We are working toward, we know where we need to be, and it has been verified by the Science Based Targets Initiative, and now we are working through how do we need to get there. But it's almost like, you know, when you are here today and you say, somebody asks you, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? You say one thing today, and then in a year's time you will come here and you will give a different answer. So I think it's also important that you set your targets, but then you make them flexible and agile to adjust to whatever is happening in the world of modern sourcing and within your company and within the world of business.
A bit of a kind of different approach. So I mentioned we started, you know, clearly the best place to start is to ask tons of questions to our suppliers, because we don't get enough of them from us already. Went to what we suspected to be our top 50 emitting suppliers. It took 4 months, took 2 people, a lot of frustration, and the range of what we got back compared to our debt space estimates. So some were close, some were out by about 10,000%. So you can see the degree to which, if we were then to try in any way rely on that information to shape our own sort of supply chain emissions reduction approach, we've you know, quite possibly been going off in the wrong direction. So yeah, my strong advice is, yeah, don't ignore the data, but don't be paralysed by it either. The key thing from my piece of advice I would give is engage your suppliers, engage them now. There's nothing, you know, people say, I don't feel qualified to have an ESG, you know, I'm a buyer, I don't want a supplier manager or whatever it might be. I'm an account manager, yeah, I don't know about this, you know, same as many of the risks we've encountered in the past in business roles, we didn't know about them either, and it's incumbent on us to learn, you know, as I said before, learn your own company's credentials, but take the opportunity to upskill yourself and your teams. And the final piece would be just that directional alignment. Don't worry for now, but are you intended to become a net zero company if it's environment that's your priority, if it's matters of social value, again asking those questions, but doing it through engagement and focusing by materiality in the first instance would be my advice on how to get started.
Jim, I'd like to ask you the same question, but I want you to come at it from both angles. So you're the chief exec of ADEC, so you are a buyer, but you're also a service provider. So I'd like to know from your buy-side hat on, what you're doing for ADEC internally, and then obviously from the service provider's perspective as well.
Sure. Well, first of all, great answers, and getting started on that journey is what really matters. From us as a company, there's several entities out there. One of them is called Global Compact, and they're a voluntary organization associated with the UN. I think they're up to probably about 12,000 companies right now. Global Compact has sort of a, you post your information, and then if you're going to go upstream to eventual science-based targets. So that's like a global registry. Every country then has a Global Compact committee or board. I was on the one in the Philippines, but every country has it and then rolls up sort of like it doesn't cover all of the SDGs, but it covers a lot of the business-driven issues and the science-based targets. So from a company standpoint, we have to basically be auditable because we're in this business. I'd like to, as a probably one of the few people in here that actually does it for a living, I'd like to, first of all, dismiss that this didn't come from just like the vacuum. Right? If you really look at this is an extrapolation of environmental engineering. Environmental engineering has been doing all of these numbers and data crunching for a hell of a long time across many fields. Before you build that billion-dollar bridge, you're going to spend about $10 million on an environmental impact study. The ESG world borrowed a lot from environmental world. So when we got into this business to provide the solution, we've got roughly now about 160 PhDs, really smart guys about very specialized pieces of science. And sometimes not that easy to deal with when it comes to corporate world, because the science world was basically based upon they're building $1 billion bridge, they do their business, and then they're put back in the cupboard. ESG is a ever-evolving and kind of continuous engagement model. So what did we do as a company or as a group is first we tried doing it ourselves, put some software guys and professional services, that didn't work. We then acquired a company in California because of the level of environmental compliance was at a very high level across the 50 states. California was very high. So we used that as a platform to then build off of. While we provided entitlement work for like federal government contracts, if Amazon builds in a fulfillment center, we provide them their environmental data. Again, I'm just giving you some relevance. ESG became an extension of using a lot of those data skills, capabilities, software to then provide people or clients to help them on their journey. Because right after you get done with ESG, you're going to get hit with, what are you doing about PFAS? PFAS are basically, it's a chemical compound that comes off of Teflon and among several other things. Terrible. It's in our water supply, it's in your blood, my blood, all of us. Similar to, you're going to have water footprint. ESG is just the sort of the gateway to the what's next. So hard scientists are going to circle back in on top of the general ESG. This is just the beginning, folks. I want to put a positive spin on that, but the platforms that you're putting in place will soon be tracking plastic, virgin plastic, recycled plastic. It'll be tracking your environmental footprint per city, because you're going to be asked to, if you have an operation in the city, you're going to be asked to roll up to their contribution. Sorry, I get excited about this.
That's great. We feed off your enthusiasm. So, Chris, going back to one of the comments that you made, that you were putting a mandate in place that for any supplier that had a contract worth more than 1 million, they had to either already be signed up to SBTI or commit to get one. What sort of deadline have they got to commit to get one, and how are you policing that they are actually getting one?
I'll just answer the first bit. So their deadline is my deadline. So I mentioned we've got this target to have 7% of our spend with suppliers who have approved science-based targets by November 25. So SBTI, unless you're an SME, they allow for a 2-year window to do the assessment, do some calculations and make your target, submit it to them for validation. So therefore I'm telling them they need to make that initial commitment by November 23 in essence. So that's job one. But if we can't get that, in 2 cases so far, then we just push for it as early as possible. But more than when they set the target, what will then that target then say? I mean, as I said, so Paris compels 2050, but I have to be net zero in my supply chain by 2030 and go Viva as an organisation by 2040. And actually to have any hope of the 1.5 degree outcome, 1.1, 1.2 degrees today, we have to try and engender some acceleration. So that's the first part of that. Also, I would say it's not just SBTI. You'll hear a lot about science-based targets, not necessarily the science-based targets initiative. There are others. Race to Zero is another one that comes along quite a bit. For us, we've had this view confirmed by the SBTI themselves. It doesn't have to be with them, as long as it aligns to the key principles around sequestration, not offsetting, around 2050, around looking at all the relevant scopes. Then we can validate that within the 70%. Tracking, much harder. So this is where our focus today, and I would defend, in my interview review correctly so, has been on policing the front door, so reducing risks for 2030 in essence, as well as engaging existing suppliers. Once the supplier said yes, Aviva, get off my case and sign up to science-based targets, fantastic. It goes in the contract, and then we go and talk to the next one to try and get them in, and that. As long as they do then go on and make that public declaration, they will be held to account by their investors, by their employees, by their supply partners, more so than I, as one customer ever could do. However, what we've noticed is suppliers starting to miss their date for submitting that letter into SBTI, so we're starting, my red list is getting longer, unfortunately, put it that way.
What's going to happen to your red list?
Well, I would like SBTI to play a more proactive role in that, but unfortunately, they're still reacting to the surge of interest in SBTI. So, at the moment, there's an escalation pathway. It starts with a call. If necessary, we'll issue contractual letters, which I know, in the spirit of the partnership that we've been talking about in this room all day, might not necessarily seem like the best step. And eventually, we'll coalesce into the exec sponsor for that line of business, writing a letter, signing a letter that I've written, and then eventually getting them on call. Where they have signed up to our terms, we have explicit termination rights within there. However, as we've discussed with many in the room in the breakouts, it's an unlikely trigger that we'd likely pull in many circumstances. So I think that being the key consequence, there is a challenge around what we do next, but that's tomorrow's problem.
So you mentioned earlier on the Chancellor Lane project. Is everybody familiar with the Chancellor Lane project? You can put your hand up if you're not familiar with it. There's a couple of people that aren't familiar with it. Do you want to introduce the Chancellor project, or?
You're probably better qualified to do that.
Okay, so the Chancellor project is a charity, and they have set out as a mission to actually bring sustainability into as many of the projects as they possibly can. So they are a load of volunteer lawyers, as well as some full-time employees that are working to create a bank of clauses that the world can use. And those clauses are all focused on driving sustainability. So they've created a bank of about 36 clauses at the moment that are open source. Anybody can lift them, put them into their contracts, and the whole idea is these clauses aren't just for lawyers. These clauses are to be out there for the business owner, procurement, everybody to know that they exist, so that they know that there is a way of driving more sustainability within their arrangements. So it's a brilliant initiative, and you've obviously signed up to it.
So we, as I say, we sort of developed our own via collaboration with Salesforce, but then we became aware of it. Absolutely. There's a strong correlation between our current Schedule 1, the Chancery Lane artifacts. Fully recommend it.
So sustainability is expensive, isn't it? So, I mean, are you, all of you, obviously it costs a lot of money to invest in doing it yourself. You've got teams of additional people, overheads. You potentially are going to end up paying more to your suppliers for them to become more sustainable. Obviously that means there's a very top-down mandate that we've got to become sustainable with stakeholders and investors and so on top of that. Is that quite an easy journey? It's a very open question, but anybody wants to take that. Unless
I looked at you, thanks. Well, no, of course it's not an easy journey. And I think, yes, it is more expensive now, but it will be a benefit in the future in the long run. So whereas you invest now, like for example, CLT has moved to Green Office. Yes, it costed money, it was expensive. We could have stayed in our older building, but in the long run, in 5 years, we will see a huge benefit from it. The same in the supply chain. So yes, you may have to invest money to move from supplier. You may have to convince that amazing stakeholder who loves this supplier and says nobody else can do it better than this supplier. But you look at why, challenge that, and say, right, what it's going to take us to get us where we need to be, not now, but in 5 years. So I think we're looking with the future, viewing the future, rather than now. Yes, of course, a lot more money, but we don't look how much we spend now. We look like, each of us have projections, 1 year, 5 year savings, 10 year savings. So I think it's kind of the same approach to your supply chain management.
And then it'd be fascinating to get Jim's thoughts. I mean, from my point of view, we tried to look, it's the first thing the Exco asked us to say, here's your target, make sure we deliver it. By the way, it doesn't cost us anything, is it? And the answer is, well, in terms of supply chain costs, there's no evidence yet that we've been able to find that there's a direct correlation between buying greener and increased cost. The key warning I would give is that set restoration is not cheap, depending on the geographic regions you're able to execute in. But natural capital, as Jim's already explained, is a finite resource, and there's a stat in there, something like if the Fortune 500 all tried to sequester their emissions through forestry alone, there wouldn't be enough land mass on planet Earth. So and some species of trees take 10 years to become effective carbon capture. So again, these things cost money, and they'll cost more money the longer you wait. So, and no one is going to get to a net zero position without the use of natural carbon capture. So I'll just have to look at that side of the equation.
Okay. I guess let me, what are the drivers for a company? Sometimes you'll see these lists, the name and shame, kind of like, okay, the top 100. Our phone rings when whoever the top bottom 10, as far as like handling sustainability, or if they've had an issue, or they've received an activist letter from a shareholder all of a sudden, or some hedge fund has decided to say they're not dealing with their supply chain. That all of a sudden stirs up a whole bee's nest in the board of directors, the risk managers. So what drives the business? Historically, if nothing has happened, so it's just under normal conditions, they may start a process of capacity building, sort of like, oh, let's go find out about this. And they usually start off with cheap and cheerful, kind of the easy framework, something that they can do so that they can say, yeah, we're part of a framework. Now, some of that started years ago with carbon disclosure. Anybody familiar with Carbon Disclosure Project? Again, not you. All right, so one person, right? So it was an NGO started here in the UK. It's now the biggest footprinting sort of exercise where they really focused on carbon, and then they expanded to cities and now plastic. But one thing you don't know, for 9 years, Carbon Disclosure Project sent all of their back office and scoring for about 8,000 of the companies to the Philippines. So my point being is, all of you, if you touched carbon disclosure for the 9 years that we managed their back office and scoring for them, we're actually, we were having an impact in your journey. So I guess I'm just trying to point out, all of us, again, can have some impact. The process flow that we've seen, frankly, is somebody will spend 25 to 50,000 on their sort of like get to know you, cheap and cheerful, sort of exploratory. By the next year or 2 years, they're spending anywhere from 75 to 150. By third year, they're spending $250,000 to $500,000 with us. Not because we're all of a sudden so expensive, it's because they've started to see value in the journey. Now, this was taking about, I guess 10 years ago, this was taking about 5 or 6 years. It's collapsed down now to about 36 months. That spend is basically going up. I guess that's a good thing, or they're just becoming aware of why the outside pressures are pushing them to spend more money and engage, whether consultants or software, to begin that journey. That's what we've experienced. And again, some people just stay at a certain level. They do GRI. Are you doing TCFD? Right. So for the insurance or financial world, there's a certain task force for financial disclosure, which typically fits that industry. There's other industries that have other frameworks, and that allows them to sort of compare apples to apples. So I guess my point being is, the industry is going to continue to evolve as we measure what matters. And again, there's so many support services that are then going to be needed as they then start to change. Because just because you're measuring it doesn't mean it's going to drive change. The race to zero is a great thing, but we still have to do a lot more. You're talking about, we're not even talking yet about natural resources, which I gotta think is on your agenda soon. Climate is just one thing. All of the other aspects that we need to measure is coming quickly.
Okay, thank you. I've got some more questions, but I really want to take some questions from the floor. Are there any questions from the floor? Yeah, there's Shivani, do you want to run with the mic, please? Thank you. Thanks.
This may be a question for Chris and Alessa. Brilliant presentations, by the way. Thank you, and really congratulations on some pretty ambitious SBTI's targets there. So we talked a little bit about, I recognise this has been more focused on climate, really quite sensibly. If we take a step back, there's 16 other goals there. We talked a little bit about impact earlier. How do we move away from, not move away, but start transition from an ESG risk-based approach to do less harm or do least harm towards something that's making more of a positive impact? And is it realistic to expect a CPO to start to embed those metrics into your sourcing. And so if you've got those three levers, carrot, stick, and education, what do you need as a CPO to be able to start to implement to expect more, to start to create that absorptive capacity that Jim mentioned, start to create those market-based solutions that the industry needs, and basically basically challenge us more. What do you need to be able to do that?
It's a big question, yeah. Fear the 1 minute question.
Sorry, it's 2 minutes, but yeah.
It's a great question. I think so. Many sourcing professionals in this room that probably tired and stressed and been trying to bat away inflation, deal with supply chain resilience issues on the continent, and as well as managing risk as they always have. So then sort of layering, you're very right. The E of ESG on top of that has been asked. Our approach is to embed it in what we do. We're not trying to set up a separate supply chain function. We're just trying to make it part of the way we discharge our procurement duties. And our secondary priority is supply chain diversity and the development of social value, which has been hard because we don't understand our start point. As I explained to you, you can tell my CPO last year how many SMEs we use, which was a very rudimentary introductory measure to supply chain diversity. And so for me, I think current state assessment is certainly my priority in this space. So there's organisations we've referenced here today which can help with that, but also defining what's because you mentioned the 17. There's no way even the whole organisation, never mind the buying and selling professionals, can have influence on all 17 as profoundly interconnected as they are. So you have to place your chips. For us, it's on environment, and then now we're moving to look at supply chain diversity. But what I would say is understand what it is that you want to see. So I set off on this path, and then very quickly had a conversation with our CEO, who's very clearly interested in the location from which we're buying, and the cost of living in the UK. They want to be able to tell a story of supporting the creation of good jobs in the communities we operate in. Now, I couldn't even tell them how big these organisations are. Never mind, I can tell them, given enough time and money, where their headquarters is, where their operations are. So it's kind of trying to push through the ambiguity of the dearth of data in this space, just through to supplier engagement. But again, I could do that and find out where they're all based, go back a year later, feeling quite a lot older, and so actually what I really wanted to know was what's the ownership structure of those organisations, or what's the workforce makeup of those organisations. And not just in the UK, I want to know for our global supply chain, and those challenges are clearly quite vast. So certainly resource would be needed. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, it does, but some extent, yeah.
Another question over here, please, Rob.
Hello. I was just wondering, to the extent that you use bonuses and service credits in terms of to incentivize, because ultimately if some of these things, such as the letter, I'm not super familiar with it, is an SLA and you just build it into the traditional structure, does that work, or is that kind of missing the point? Is there any experience there?
This isn't to do with necessarily on the outsourcing, but we have had experience where the executives of the corporation will say, we're going to tie our executive pay to our sustainability outcomes, which of course they never then ask the sustainability professionals. So we've had experience several where, Fortune 1000 companies, they've said, oh, in a news release, this is what we're doing. All of a sudden, that's a huge lift. But it does work, but there's about a year of consulting to figure out what that means and to really turn it into actionable KPIs. I don't know about the service. I've been on the side of sort of that. It's a bit of a challenge when it comes down to a relationship with a customer. Sometimes they're needed, and I understand that, but it also sets a certain tone. It's like, if you're going to treat me like a vendor, I'm going to treat you like a customer. And it sort of goes down a doom loop. So as quickly, in my experience for that, as quickly you can avoid that and work it out as a relationship as we have a challenge, the better off the outsourcing relationship is. I hope I was able to answer that.
On the buy side, there's a really good resource I pointed to, I think it's Deloitte. They developed a sort of the foundation of supplier incentivization for sustainability. They covered, I think it's like 16 or 17 different actions that the buying organisation can take to incentivize suppliers. So fully encourage you to kind of, there's things like, as you heard earlier, supplier awards, events and recognition that way. Payment terms is one that comes, can you give preferential payment terms? If your suppliers care enough about that, and discounts and bonuses, which it's a tricky conversation against all the other headwinds that we mentioned earlier, but definitely encourage you to take it.
I think I just would like to add here, we were talking about service credits and SLAs. It just goes a bit of, think about agile and then service credits. Of course, it's great to have service credit to motivate suppliers and then reward them, but then you need to also be mindful what behavior you dictate. Because if you set SLA, that supplier may drop everything else and just, I have got this SLA, I have to deliver against this SLA. So it may work with some, but maybe like sustainability that is so new, you don't really know what you ask and it keeps on changing. Maybe SLA is not just the thing there yet. But yeah, just mindful, I guess, what behavior will it drive and what will you get from supplier.
Yeah, I'd like to ask one closing question to you all, and that is, I started off with this, I think ours could be put on a pedestal as a leading industry, an industry for good. And I think we're all feeling really passionate that the role of the buyer and the role of the service provider could really shift the needle here. What do you think we need to collaboratively do? It's supposed to be an industry all about collaboration, collaborating between buyers and service providers and partners. What about us collaborating as buyers and service providers and the industry association? What can we do? What's our next step?
Ladies first.
Well, I think the answer is there. Create forums. I'll give you an example. Lloyds Banking Group created this amazing forum. Okay, that was with their suppliers, but this forum, people get talking about it. Why don't, each sector will have its own challenges. Even sustainability is one thing, but for law firm, sustainability will be one thing. For manufacturing will be another thing. For James' area will be a totally different thing. So I think it's that collaboration in different industries, different sectors, but also between each other, keep the conversation going. I know it's quite hard because it also sets competitive edge. So if you have got this brilliant idea, you may not want to disclose it to everybody else in the room because it drives your competitiveness. But then I guess we can always share the approach that brought you to that idea, and that the companies can start thinking from that way and see where it gets you. So forums, organizations like GSA, this is my first time attending this, but I mean, the speeches today were amazing and really appreciate this opportunity. And no, I think for me personally, know that I learned some groundbreaking theory here that I'll go back to DLT and say, let's apply it. But I think what it helped me to structure it in my head, how I can then go back and apply it to the processes that we do at DLT. And not just say, we have got this idea, let's set this, and who knows how we get there, and does it even make any sense?
Well, listening to the video that you played at the beginning, there's no room for being competitive here. It's saving the world, isn't it? So, yeah, Chris.
Yeah, exactly that. Not a competitive issue in my mind, and I think we've been far too cagey as an industry, perhaps, and in my industry, in insurance, we saw the collapse or the partway collapse of the Net Zero Insurance Alliance a couple of weeks ago. It's quite a sad moment, whereby we've been aiming to collaborate on exactly that, the decarbonisation of claims fulfilment, those kind of things. But we as buyers absolutely should be doing this. If even only on information collection, you ask suppliers, mad as hell that we just ask them the same questions time and again. Information security, this is another one, and it's going to get more, as we start asking more questions around their divestment credentials, etc. So if you haven't already for your industry, why not be the one who develops that collaboration? Because for sure you'll have peers that are thinking the same thing.
I would like to, I guess, leave it at that. I'd like to ask each and every one that we have something to contribute in our professional lives, whether buyers, sellers, or the different providers in our space. But the answer is out there. The answer is out there. It's within society's grasp. What can we do under the guidance and leadership of GSA to collectively commit, each and every one, to something? Something, so that if we meet next year, we can turn and basically commit to say, we started this program, we helped this NGO, we launched a pilot. Some of them are not going to work, but it's honestly taking a little bit out of an entrepreneurial's page. It's like, fail fast, let's get moving, let's do something. What is all of our commitments? From our side, I can speak to what we're doing. We're making plenty of mistakes, but we're also learning quickly and evolving to the opportunities. So I commit to be part of the journey, and as we organize this in a better way, whatever we can contribute to it, I would love to be part of it and see. I think we have a much broader role, to be frank, that we all can contribute, but then benefit from. Okay, I want to leave it on a positive note. There is something in this for all of us. There is no business without an environment, okay? I hate to be, again, not negative Jim, but we are doing this because it's not just the right thing to do, but it's bloody smart business. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you to everybody on the panel. Thank you very much. And I've got